Unfortunately, the Phillies, with all the history they've been making this season that's been positive, has also made some history that's not so positive. And starting with the pitching staff, this is by no surprise the drop-off that we've seen. We saw it with Christopher Sanchez. We saw it with Aaron Nola, who had tied his career high with 8 runs allowed Thursday. Then we saw Zach Wheeler and Taijuan Walker. I don't even know if you could blame it on that, but
fine.
He's fine. Ranger, we have seen right now the hit to the pitching staff, and what I think annoys me the most, and I've heard a number of people talking about this, is the schedule really did not allow the Phillies to be successful. It set them up to fail, essentially. You cannot take baseball players and completely throw them out of a routine to have 3 days off between before and after the London series, and then go right to Boston, and then go right to Baltimore. And you have guys that haven't pitched. They're off their routine. They have extra days of rest. Someone like Spencer Turnbull that had 10 days of rest. It messes with you. And Zach Wheeler, we saw a career high 8 runs allowed. He has not allowed 4 home runs ever. Yeah. That was the first time in his career that Zach Wheeler allowed 4 home runs. And he has allowed 4 home runs in his last 10 starts combined prior to that game this weekend. He also became the first Phillies pitcher to allow 4+ home runs in a game since Kyle Gibson back in July of 2022. He's the first Phillies pitcher to do that to allow 4+ home runs and 8+ runs in a game since Vicente Padilla, April of 2005. These are not good records, but it's no surprise to me that coming off of an awful amount of travel and rest and routine being thrown off, that you're seeing these types of numbers. It's only the second start in Zacho's career where he gave up 3 home runs in the first 3 innings of any game. The other was 7 years ago. I mean, there's been a lot of things that you've seen from this team that are not characteristic of how they best play. Matt Strom, the scoreless streak, as we saw this weekend, came to an end after 27 straight outings. All these things, to some, might be a reason to hit the panic button. To me, it's just a reminder that they're human and that they have to use this week, when you have 2 home series back-to-back, get back on your schedule. Get back on your shit and get back to what has helped this team be successful, which is that routine of, okay, especially with Zach Wheeler and the pitching staff, your days of rest, your bullpen sessions, everything is on schedule, because this past weekend was the wake-up call that they're still human. Ranger, Zach, they're still human.
Yeah, and I don't want to make too much of it, but I do think Zach Wheeler, and let me preface it.
Oh,
Zach Wheeler threw a really nice game at Fenway Park with Garrett Stubbs just a week prior.
Yeah.
That being said, albeit a small sample size, Zach Wheeler's ERA is triple with Garrett Stubbs compared to JT Realmuto. I don't want to use that as a convenient excuse for why Wheeler got shelled yesterday, because he's one of the best pitchers in the game. It shouldn't matter, but it is something to keep an eye on. Zach Wheeler, the Phillies in general miss JT Realmuto. Yeah. There's no denying that. But Zach Wheeler is the one I got my eye on. And if he goes out and has another, subpar Stubbs performance next time, maybe Caleb Cotham and him have a discussion, and do you call your own game? I don't know. I'm not there yet, but it's definitely something I have my binoculars out on, seeing how those two do together. So just, something to keep an eye on. I do think it might have played a part yesterday.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We'll see. JT's a huge loss, and he, my concern with him leaving was never the offense, because you can overcome that. My concern was, how does it affect the starting pitching? Because JT's one of the best in the game. And, there's going to be a trickle-down effect of that. Hopefully, yesterday was just a bad Zach Wheeler start. Tyler, how much stock do you put in the catcher-pitcher relationship? It's a small sample size. Yeah, I think they've only pitched together 8 times.
Sure.
7 or 8
I think
times.
it means something. There is something to having a battery and a guy that you trust, especially, I don't necessarily think
because he probably goes thoughtless with JT.
Right. I don't think it's spots. I don't think it's certain setups. I think it's knowing your pitch. So, every guy has a catcher that they feel that is seamless with, right? And it may not be the best catcher on the staff, but more times than not, it probably is. I think that Wheeler probably has a really good rapport with JT that makes it kind of seamless. Inversely, I think that Aaron Nola and JT at times are on different planets. in terms
Stubbs
of
does
pitch
catch
calling.
Nola a decent amount.
So I think that Nola
to your point, he might work better with
Nola
Stubbs.
and JT have this weird, like, I don't want to call it a disconnect because they're all professionals and they just work through it. But I think there is something to be said for Nola and JT maybe not being on the same page nearly as much as and I know PitchCom makes it a little bit different, but you almost never see Zach Wheeler shake off JT Realmuto because they have a really good rapport. I don't think it's not concrete, it's not definitive, but there is something to having a rapport with a certain catcher that you're going to see every fifth day.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's something I remember you mentioned before, Jamie, when Stubbs was catching for Zach Wheeler. Chemistry and being on the same page and that trust in each other as a pitcher and catcher is very important. I mean, I know Seth Fisher brings up Chooch in the chat. That's why someone like Chooch was so loved, because you have to be able to manage the game. Right, you have to be able to manage the game well together. And yesterday's a game as you're looking at Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns, must-watch baseball.
The first time they ever faced off.
This is must-watch baseball, and I was like talking trash for a little while at least with my Orioles friends, like, oh, this is incredible, and it was until it wasn't. But it just was very unfortunate because I know somebody else mentioned their concerns about Zach in the chat. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Concern yet, but it's
something to keep an eye on.
And it's not Zach related. It's just how does he do here with Stubbs? I think it's a pretty interesting storyline for the next 3.5 weeks, whatever it is for JT.
John Peace is saying Wheeler's ERA goes up to over 3 in day games this year, and you think he just doesn't like his routine being thrown off. I didn't actually look at that stat, but that's
yes, I've read that before.
I was gonna say I've definitely heard in general how much Zach Wheeler, he's an ace. He's very aware of what works best for him, how he thrives, and what his routine needs to be, and that actually does make sense if day games versus night games, an extra day of rest versus the usual rest does throw him off tremendously.